Imagine for a moment you're sitting down on your computer or your couch, depending on where you watch anime. You head on to your favorite yet questionably legal site and tune into a brand new anime starring this season that you haven't seen yet. Within the first few moments of watching it, the character's briefly introduced and then whisked away to a fantasy world where he's going to start his new life there. Sound familiar?
The year was 2012, and a new anime called Sword Art Online began airing that year. Now, I'm willing to bet that most of the people, if not all watching this, know what Sword Art Online is. Love or hate the show, you cannot deny though that it had a very immense impact on the anime industry as a whole. The anime popularized the isekai genre, among other things. And while other popular isekai existed before that, like Inuyasha and Rayearth to be two examples, the success of Sword Art Online reinforced the genre to become the anime staple that it is today. Quickly, more and more isekai sprung up to popularity after the success of Sword Art Online, prime examples being Overlord, Tanya the Evil, and In a New World with My Smartphone? I'm not sure if I got that title right, but it's not worth me looking that up. With the success of any genre, parodies are bound to pop up. For the isekai genre specifically, Konosuba is a prime example, as it critiques the genre in a comedic fashion. A parody, however, is the thing that I want to challenge your definition of. You see, according to dictionary.com, a parody is defined as a humorous or satirical imitation of a serious piece of literature or writing. In that definition, it mentions a parody can be humorous, but it does not say it must be humorous. And this is where I want to challenge the definition. Within the definition itself, it mentions that satire makes a good replacement for humorous intent. And this is where ReZero comes in. ReZero, whether it meant to be or not, I believe is a perfect example of a parody of the isekai genre, and maybe even of shonen in general. As the series progresses, the show has clear examples of some of the biggest genre staples and converts them into a darker tone than normal in order to parody them. Think back to the beginning of this video. Remember the situation that I described? Sounds like something you would see in a comedy, right? It was almost rushed to a comedic point. The amount of adjusting the main character actually took was very reduced to a minimum. Subaru is actually introduced into the ReZero world this exact way. For some isekai, especially older examples, the backstory is normally the determinant as the main character is actually trying to get home. However, in more modern examples, I would say that it has become less and less relevant. One of the big examples that I can think of off the top of my head is Grimgar, in where the backstory means very, very little to the story. Take a group of outcasts that didn't come from a fantasy world that need to survive, and you can have the exact story as Grimgar without it being an isekai. To some extent, the very idea of it being an isekai has started to become more of a cliche and maybe a narrative story point than it actually has become any relevance to the character's personality. Or it can sometimes serve as a clever way to how they're able to use modern technology or modern knowledge in order to solve certain situations. Finally, it can serve as being an opportunity for the main character to be a vessel for the people watching, as a self-insert protagonist, but I'll go more into that later. In Subaru's case, he doesn't really seem to care too much about the people he left behind. And later in the series, it does reveal more about why, and it's basically because he has no friends, which is kind of dark if you think about it. As I mentioned before, I feel like the vagueness behind most isekai characters having a lackluster backstory now is so that they can be self-inserted into the story and be the reader's vessel. The ironic part is that Subaru is a very flawed character with a ton of vices, and I believe even in a way is meant to portray the loner aesthetic as he is an actual loner. Because of this vagueness of the backstory, he's a character that you immediately want to relate to and almost self-insert into, especially at the beginning when it's shown that he's quite clever in certain situations. It also doesn't help that he keeps pointing out cliches, since in his world, much like ours, the isekai genre exists, so he knows what to expect. This initially and almost kind of cynical tone towards the series is, I feel, what a lot of people would do if they ever found themselves in an isekai world. However, he has a lot of vices and problems that hold him back as a character. And almost his vices are because of his loner lifestyle, the fact that he is a shut-in. He skipped high school, so he doesn't really have a lot of relationship experience. This is probably one of his biggest vices as the show progresses, as he immediately falls in love with the first girl that is nice to him. I could honestly make an entire video about this, but I think that in a way, his lack of backstory is actually almost a darker take on the normal. And with him being a loner leads into a lot more about his character and who he is as a person. The overpowered main character trait is a part of isekai, but normally it's because it finds its way into probably shonen in general. Whenever you make a show where the main character is going to succeed a lot, sometimes you get this feeling that they are overpowered. Mostly because the inability for the main character to actually lose the fight, because the story has to progress. You can't just have the main character die and unable to succeed their goals, or if you can, it's something that you can only do it once or twice at best. Definitely, isekai and shonen in general are accused of doing this quite a lot, although if you look at even some Western examples, such as Star Wars: The Clone Wars, you can definitely tell that it is not specific to anime. The idea of plot armor exists within many characters, within many different genres. So, in a lot of times, the characters are accused of being overpowered, and normally rightfully so. I'm sure that everybody here watching this can definitely think of one or two examples where a character probably through some kind of bullshit manages to get away in a situation they really shouldn't. In the isekai genre, though, it's kind of different. Normally, the main character is portrayed as having this one special, unique power. A prime example would be in Sword Art Online, where Kirito is the only one who is able to dual-wield swords. Another prime example is in Konosuba, which actually parodies this idea, where at the beginning of the adventure, Kazuma is allowed to choose whatever power he wants off of these cards that are given to him. In probably the cruelest twist of fate the show has, and probably the biggest example of how it's an ironic isekai, Subaru is actually an overpowered character. While he doesn't really have any big combat powers to speak of, at least not initially within the series, he probably has the most overpowered ability in the entire anime. Because he's able to repeatedly come back to life, spoiler alert if you haven't watched episode 1 of this, he essentially has the ability to never fail whenever he puts his mind to something. Because in the worst case scenario, he'll just be able to die and come back and try again. Subaru also seemingly has an infinite amount of these retries. The issue that he lacks though is raw combat power. Most of the times, he's not able to actually defend himself and normally relies on others to take out the villain for him. Prime example is whenever he's in the capital in the first encounter, he has to have Reinhardt save him. This leads him to being a very overpowered character, yet not in the way that you would imagine. In order to effectively use his ability, he has to use it a lot. Since his ability, once again, doesn't really give him much combat power, it normally causes him to run over situations again and again and again, figuring out how he died, and even having to take some deaths in order to save those close to him. Because of this, it causes him a lot of pain, and as the series shows, it puts him through a lot of stress too. Because he has the safety net, it oftentimes causes him to run into dangerous situations, of course to make the most out of the ability. In a way, even though he is the most powerful character in the show, he has to suffer a lot in order to access that power.
A harem is actually a genre of anime all on its own. However, it oftentimes can mix in with the isekai genre. As most people watching this video, I'm sure can name an isekai or two that they watched that had a harem in it. One of the big things about a harem is normally having multiple characters in love with one, and this is where the great tragedy of a harem is in. Subaru is a member of a love triangle with Emilia and Rem. While this doesn't affect Emilia that much, it affects Rem and Subaru a lot. You see, harem and love triangles can serve multiple purposes. The easy one is that they can be dramatic, as you're not sure which character the main character will choose. But they can also serve as a sort of power fantasy, especially harems in general. However, realistically, a harem would not be a good thing to have. It would lead to a lot of heartbreak. On top of that, it would be almost impossible to maintain. ReZero focuses on the heartbreak version of this by introducing probably one of the most tragic characters of the show, Rem. She initially is clinging to her sister in almost an act of atonement because she feels that she has wronged her sister in the past. Subaru shows her that she can actually move on from that past and start looking towards the future, thus causing her to fall in love with him. In a now almost iconic scene, Subaru rejects Rem's advances straightforward and admits that he's in love with Emilia. While I think that this says a lot about Subaru's growth as a character, and about how he's now looking towards Emilia as an actual person, instead of an idealized version of herself, it also says a lot about Rem too. Rem is in love with Subaru, and now wants to try to make him happy. However, unfortunately, her own happiness will never be fully achieved while she is in love with Subaru, since she prioritizes him over herself. She hopes that one day maybe he can return her feelings. Unfortunately, that will never happen, something that she also might be fully aware of. I'm willing to bet that I missed a lot of isekai tropes when I was making this video. But I hope I got my point across. ReZero is an anime made for its time. While it stands well on its own, put it into context, it's a lot better than what people realize. Intended or not, it serves as a grand critique of one of the most popular genre of its time. But, now of course, I should point out that with any critique or parody, this doesn't mean the thing that it's based off of is bad. If you like isekai, I believe that's perfectly fine. But sometimes the best way to appreciate something is to appreciate the quirks or things that make it unique, and to maybe even parody them. I think in a lot of ways, not only does the existence of the isekai genre make ReZero better, but maybe even ReZero makes the isekai genre better too. There's a lot that can be learned from fun-poking critiques and parodies to show that we can all learn a little bit from each other and from our critics and our defenders.